Half the town had painted him a murderer in their minds. Many of the others were all eaten up with curiosity for gory details. People, Hope had realized, were sick. Despite her best intentions, she found herself drawn to the window, staring out at the workshop where the woman's body had been discovered. It was still off limits, but it didn't matter. Hope didn't ever want to go in there. Ever. She should be terrified, she realized. And she was uneasy. Her gut churned and twisted, and every second she stood staring at the workshop, it got worse. But the thought of leaving Laws, where she felt safe, didn't turn her into a tangle of nerves and terror. It should. Once she found a safety zone, she didn't leave it easily, and even finding some place where she felt safe didn't mean she wasn't cringing in fear inside. It was because she was away from Clinton, she figured. Away from Joey. And she had done that. After all the times he'd told her. Earth to Hope. Blinking, she looked at Law and smiled. Sorry, I was just thinking. Then she forced a smile when she saw the concern in his eyes. You know, the longer I think about this, the less I like the idea. He had a grim look in his eyes, his mouth a straight, solid line. He wasn't sleeping. Even if she didn't hear him pacing the floor at night, she would have recognized the signs of it on his face, in the dark shadows under his eyes, the tense set of his shoulders. I'm fine, she said, trying to put a little bit of force in her voice. Circling around the desk, she leaned her hips against it and crossed her arms over her chest. Law, you've got to quit beating yourself up over me. Can't. He caught a lock of her hair and tucked it behind her ear. If I hadn't waited so long, he wasn't talking about what had happened here recently, she knew. Sighing, she caught his hand and squeezed it. Don't. Okay? Just don't. The ifs here belong to me. Only me. If I had listened to my gut the first year, and left then, things would be different. If I had told you there were problems when you first started getting worried, things would be different. There are a lot of ifs, but I was the only one who could make something change. Me, Law. Not you. He reached out and hooked an arm over her shoulders, tugging her close in a hug. It's not good enough, sweetheart. It's just not. I swear, I want to kill him. I want him dead so bad, I can taste it. Don't. Hope eased back, shaking her head. Don't. Don't think it. Don't try for it, don't plan it. Don't do it. He could. She knew that. He was more than capable of killing, and that mind of his? It could probably come up with a very clever way, one that might never be traced back to him. She caught his face in her hands, staring into hard hazel eyes. So often, those eyes were distracted, distant, focused on worlds that existed only in his head. But now they were cold, brittle as glass. He deserves to die for the shit he did to you. I won't lie and say I disagree, Hope said. But if he dies, it would come back on one of us. He's already destroyed half of my life and I have to start over. If you do anything to him, he's going to do the same to your life. He isn't worth it. But my friend is. Her heart broke a little. Rising on her toes, she pressed her lips to his cheek. Why in the world couldn't I have fallen for you? She asked, her voice cracking. Law blushed. But he stroked a hand down her hair and gave her a sheepish smile. You're like a sister to me, Hope. I know. And you're like a brother to me. She reached down and caught his hands, twined their fingers together. You are a brother, in my heart, even if we're not related by blood. You're the only real family I have left. And because of that, I'm asking you, let it go. If anything happened to you because of him, Law, it would tear me apart. His eyes narrowed. That's playing dirty. Then he squeezed her hands. Fortunately for you, I'd already come to that conclusion. Letting go of her hands, he tugged on her hair once more and said, but that doesn't mean I'm not going to spend a lot of time thinking about painful, slow ways I could make him die. Okay. As long as he didn't try to put that twisted imagination of his to use, she was good. She didn't want her ex dead. Well, she did. But she didn't need him dead. She didn't. She just needed peace. Closure. And clothes. Glancing down at her worn, thin t-shirt, she stepped back and circled around the desk. Okay, boss. Time's a-wasting. I've got money to burn and clothes to buy. Law lifted the box before she had a chance. I'll carry it. On the way out, he said, have I mentioned that I don't like this? Yes. You were pretty clear about that. She shot him a narrow glance. Law, I can't stay inside all the time. I can't. I'll only be gone a few hours. Promise. And I've got your phone, I've got the GPS. He rubbed the back of his neck. Doesn't matter. I still feel really wrong about you being out by yourself right now. Well, maybe Lena might come. Shopping, Ezra repeated. Law swore and muttered, shit, don't give me a hard time. I kept trying to talk her out of it, but she won't listen. I didn't realize I was giving you a hard time. Heaving out a sigh, Ezra pinched the bridge of his nose. Law, you can't really expect her to stay trapped inside your house for the next 6 weeks, 6 months. 6 years. There was silence on the other end of the phone. So, you don't think it's a problem? I'm being an idiot to worry. Lena went to work on Thursday, we ended up getting into an argument over it. Ezra stared out the window at her front yard, brooding. Things were still a little too unsettled between them, and he had no idea how to handle it. None. Unsettled. But not just because of the fight. He'd told her he was falling in love with her. I fucking hate it every second, but I can't make her quit her job, man. And you can't expect Hope to spend the rest of her life hiding in your house. It's not the rest of her life. It's just until this is taken care of. And what if he isn't caught? Shit. That about sums it up, Ezra agreed. He shot a glance toward the ceiling. Lena was still sleeping. The nights she'd worked, she'd come home in a dark, bitter mood, while they were still getting used to each other. He was pretty sure this wasn't routine for her. Something was going on at work, but she wouldn't talk about it. Whatever it was, she was pissed off about it, though. She'd been burning hot with fury when he'd picked her up late Saturday night, and that fury had remained just as hot, just as bright throughout the drive back to her house, and once they'd gotten there, well, he wasn't going to complain about that. Hot, edgy sex had finally let her sleep, but it hadn't eased her misery. Sunday, they'd gone to his place and she'd sat outside with a book while he worked on the deck. At the rate he was going, he wasn't going to be done by fall, hell, he'd be lucky to be done by next fall. Lately, he was at Lena's more often than he was home, anyway. She wouldn't talk to him, tell him what was bothering her. He didn't like that. Part of him worried it had something to do with the bomb he'd dropped on her, but his instincts said otherwise. He'd almost called out to the inn and asked Roz, but decided against it. If they were seriously going to try the relationship thing here, he needed to be getting the information from Lena, not her friends. Besides, he had a feeling Roz was part of the problem. He didn't know the woman, at all. But he knew Lena and Roz were friends, and nobody could piss a person off as well as a friend, or a lover. Jerking his attention back to the phone, he listened as Law finished up a rather long, disjointed monologue. So you really don't think there's any reason she can't drive to Lexington? Ezra rolled his eyes. She's got a license, right?
Yeah.
She's got a license, but that's not why I'm asking, Law snapped. What if, shit? Pinching the bridge of his nose, he leaned back in the chair and focused on the ceiling. There's no reason to think Hope's in any danger, Law. Good. Because she's heading your way. She wants Lena to go with her. Ezra managed to bite back the automatic "hell no" that sprang to his lips. But just barely. Hearing the soft pad of Lena's footsteps on the stairs and the rhythmic click of Puck's claws, he spun around in her office chair, waited for her to appear in the door. She had an unerring radar, it seemed, able to figure out almost exactly where he was with very little effort. Morning, sleepyhead. She gave him a tired smile. Did I hear you talking?
Yeah.
Law's on the phone. Apparently, Hope's got a wild hair to do some shopping in Lexington and she wants you to go with her. Lena yawned and leaned against the wall. Puck came up, nosing at her legs. Shopping? She wrinkled her nose. I'm not usually much for shopping. I think it's more because she needs to get out of the house than anything, Ezra said. She stretched her arms over her head and he tried not to stare at the pale strip of flesh exposed as her shirt lifted. Under the fabric, he could see the darker circle of her nipples, stabbing into the cotton. Now his mouth was starting to water. On a sigh, Lena said, getting out of the house doesn't sound like a bad idea. Then she grimaced. As long as it doesn't involve going into town. Sure. I'll go shower. Irritated, aggravated, and now sexually frustrated, he stared at her ass until she disappeared around the corner. She'll go, he said, his voice rough. Law laughed. You sound about as thrilled about it as I am. If we try to follow, think Hope would notice? Probably. A few seconds later the shower came on and Ezra said, besides, while they're out of town, maybe you and me can poke around a little. Poke around? Where exactly? Ezra slanted a look out the window. Lena's woods. That's where the weirdness started, right? We already tried that. So we try again. They'll be out of town, and together, plus, they'll have Puck. Whoever it is, Puck's got a nose for him, and he doesn't like him. If he starts getting that Cujo growl going on, Lena's going to haul tail, but I don't think anybody would mess with the two of them together. And nobody's going to risk getting around that dog. He'd take a bite out of a crocodile if it got too close to his lady. Puck's not bulletproof. Images of blood flashed behind Ezra's eyes. Blood on my hands. Fuck. Lena's blood. Nightmare, that was nightmare material, there. And something he didn't need to be thinking about. His throat constricted. For 5 seconds, he didn't think his heart beat at all. Neither is Lena. Neither is Hope. We want them out of this mess, we need to start looking around, because frankly, I don't think Nielsen has a clue. You're a cop. Aren't you supposed to be saying the police will handle this? Absently, Ezra massaged his thigh. I'm on leave. Besides, from where he was sitting, this wasn't exactly being handled. I'm not much help when it comes to trying on clothes, Lena said dryly, sitting in the corner of the dressing room. Puck had his head on her lap and she didn't have to see him to know he was giving her puppy dog eyes and sending her subliminal messages, along the lines of, "Can we leave, please please please?" Stores were not his favorite place. At all. Hope grumbled under her breath. What? I hate trying clothes on. Stupid jeans. They barely cover my butt, she snapped. That's the style. Lena shrugged. Stylish, for people to see my butt hanging out when I bend over? That's not style, that's trashy. She grumbled a little more under her breath and then sighed. I'll just order some longer shirts online or something. Lena listened to clothes rustling as Hope methodically went through and tried on more jeans, shirts, and a few sweaters. Can I ask you a nosy question? The wariness coming from the other woman was almost palpable. It depends, Hope said, her voice slow, reluctant. It's about law. Just wondering what the story is between you two. Story? She sounded puzzled. What do you mean? Well, you two seem pretty close. Hope sighed. We are close. I've known him my whole life. We were best friends in elementary school, middle school, right up through high school. So it's a friend thing? What does it matter? Hope hesitated for a second and then said, I'm not trying to be rude, but you're pretty involved with Ezra. Even a blind, oh, shit, I am so sorry. I can't believe I just said that. Lena laughed. Hope, I am blind. And yes, even I can see that I'm pretty involved with Ezra. But that's not exactly why I'm asking. Law is a friend of mine. He has been since he moved here, he's one of my best friends. Mostly, I'm just being nosy. Law doesn't talk about himself a whole lot. I've never seen him have company, he's never mentioned his family, doesn't talk about them. As far as I know, he doesn't even date, and if he had, I would have heard something, even if he didn't tell me. Then you show up. There doesn't seem to be any romantic interest going on there, but, well, like I said, I'm nosy. There is nothing romantic between us. Law is kind of private. That's just him. We're friends, best friends, but just friends. There was sadness in her voice, Lena noticed. A lot of it. Sadness, pain, a reluctance to talk. So, if there's not much of a story between you and Law, maybe you can tell me your story. Rising, Lena took one step forward and reached out a hand. Her fingers grazed Hope's arm and she moved her hand up, rested it on the other woman's shoulder. Now this isn't me being nosy. Really. Although you might have a hard time telling the difference. But I get the feeling you haven't ever really talked about it, whatever it might be. Maybe you need to. Thanks for the offer, Hope said, her voice faint, unsteady. But this is one of those things you just can't talk about. I think if I tried, the words might choke me. Sometimes keeping them trapped inside will do the same thing. So what's the story with you and Hope? Ezra asked as they followed the winding trail into the woods. Law smacked at a bug. There isn't a story with me and Hope. She's a friend. She needed a job. And I had a job that needed to be done. It would have worked really well if some psychotic hadn't gone and dumped the body in my workshop. Known each other long? You sure as hell are nosy, Law muttered.
Yeah.
We've known each other pretty much our whole lives. My dad and I lived next door to her folks when we were kids. lived in a small town, went to the same schools, graduated together. Ezra was quiet for a minute, the better to enjoy Law's grumbling as they cut through the underbrush. She looks like she's been put through hell. She has been through hell. Fuck, she's pretty much lived in hell ever since we got out of high school. His voice had a bite to it, heavy, hard with self-disgust. Pausing, Ezra looked back at the other man. He had stopped on the trail, staring off into the distance. But Ezra suspected he wasn't seeing the trees, or much of anything. You okay? Law slanted him a look. You ever suspected in your gut that somebody you loved was in trouble? Ezra thought of Mac.
Yeah.
He had loved her. She had been in trouble, all right, but he hadn't suspected. Not once. But Law didn't seem to need an answer. Big trouble. So you ask, but you're told everything is fine. Just fine. And because she's never lied to you before, you believe her. Couple years go by, and it turns out she was in trouble. And now it's worse, a lot worse. It's the kind of trouble that you may not be able to help her with. And if you had just pushed, before, back when you first suspected things were wrong, then this wouldn't have happened. And if you had pushed, maybe you would have made things worse. Off to the side of the trail, there was a fallen tree, covered with moss. Ezra made his way over to it and sat down, stretching his leg out in front of him. I'm not going to ask you for any information. I don't need to. I've already got a rough idea of some of the shit she had to deal with. She was married. And he beat her. He cocked a brow at Law and waited. That's the short and sweet version. It gets worse, a lot worse. Was he a cop? Scowling, Law demanded, how the hell did you know that? It wasn't that hard to figure out if you know what to look for. I knew she'd been married. I can still see where she wore a ring, even though it's been a while since she's worn it. Plus, you can tell just by the way she acts that she's been mistreated more than once in her life. That girl's never been in any kind of trouble, so it's not that. Only thing that makes sense is that she was knocked around by a cop. So I just put two and two together. Even the thought of that was enough to have Ezra seeing red. Did she try to get help?
Yeah.
And a lot of good it did her. His dad was the chief of police. His mom? She was one of the 2 doctors in our town. He had been the football captain, was on the student council. Our town's golden boy. He never got in trouble, one of those kids who could do no wrong. He and Hope started dating when we were sophomores. They got married the summer he graduated from college, although I think the mental abuse started well before that. Everybody thought they had one of those sweet little fairy tale romances. Law turned away and started to pace, scuffing his booted feet through dead, dry leaves. Hope told me everything was fine for the first couple years, but I don't think it was. Maybe she just needed to believe that. She got away from him. You're kicking yourself, and I probably would be, too, if I was in your shoes. But she got away from him. That's something you need to remember.
Yeah.
Coming to a halt, Law shoved his hands into the pockets of his jeans. In a flat, emotionless voice, he asked, You ever fantasize about killing somebody? The wash of blood, the scent of it, the feel of it. Ezra could remember that, even when he could find no other memory of that night. He'd rather remember nothing than to have the one clear memory be that of Mac's blood covering him. You really want to know what it's like to kill somebody, do you, Law? Ezra asked, forcing the words out of his tight throat. You want to walk around with that weight on you? That's not what I asked. Law turned and met his eyes. Head cocked, hazel eyes shrewd. Different thing, killing somebody and fantasizing about it. And it's a different story, probably, thinking about killing somebody who really does need to die, and being the one who had to pull the trigger for whatever your reasons were. With a fist gripping his throat, Ezra looked away. Whatever his reasons were. His reasons? He hadn't been worrying about reasons. He had seconds less to decide. Did he pull the trigger or did he risk dying himself? What was his name? The bastard who wailed on hope? Law's mouth twisted in a bitter snarl. Joe. Joey. There was a time when I'd called him a friend, too. And that's a punch in the stomach, I'll tell you. I reckon it would be. Ezra shoved off the trunk and studied the woods. It was darker here under the canopy of leaves and relatively cooler, relatively. But it was hot as a bitch outside and relatively cooler wasn't really that much cooler. His shirt clung to him and sweat trickled down his neck and back. So this guy, Joe. He was a cop. And it sounds like he's a bastard and a half, beating on his wife. He's got half the town where you lived eating out of his hand. He still got his badge? The look on Law's face was enough of an answer. Ezra's gut clenched, turned hot inside him and twisted. Dirty cop, dirty cop. Maybe not on the level that Mac had been dirty. But a cop who could beat his wife, and get away with it, what else could he call it? That was about as dirty as they came, really. That hot, greasy knot in his gut started to claw and climb up his throat. Blood roared in his ears. Put it away. Put it away, he told himself. So he's still got his badge. Ezra blew out a breath. So here's the problem for you, aside from the fact that he shouldn't still have his badge. The fact is, he does. And if you keep thinking about doing things, sooner or later, you might decide to act. You ever thought about taking it beyond the fantasy? My problem is that I know it would cause hell for Hope if I tried, Law said bitterly. And she's been through enough hell.
Yeah.
Okay. So maybe you should stop fantasizing, and put her ex out of your mind. Besides, Ezra said, studying the trees, we've got enough to deal with around here now, just trying to figure out what's going on. And exactly how are we supposed to do that? Beats the hell out of me, Ezra muttered. But for now? We keep prowling around these woods until we see something, find something. Or somebody. Shit. You know we could be here for a while. Glum, Law stared into the trees.
Nah.
We won't be here any more than another hour or so. Ezra shot a glance at his watch. Lena and Hope will be heading back by then and we're not leaving them alone. Slowly, Nia Hollister read the email again. What is this? She wondered. Please call me the moment you receive this email. Extremely urgent, regarding your cousin Jolene Hollister. Jolene. She rubbed her eyes. Why would a sheriff in Ash, Kentucky, be emailing her over Jolie? The words tripped around, ran together in her mind, not making much sense. It was getting late, she'd had a long day, she was tired, but not that tired. Go to sleep, call in the morning. After you've rested, she told herself. She swallowed, wanting to do just that. Extremely urgent, your cousin Jolene Hollister. She stared at the contact numbers he'd left. One matched the number included in the little signature line at the bottom. The other he'd told her was his cell. He'd included all the necessary information for her to make the international call as well, thoughtful of him. Why? Tears were blurring her eyes. Somehow, she knew. Nia surged to her feet and started to pace the small, tight confines of her hotel room. No. A sob built up in her chest. Jolie. Pressing one shaking hand to her lips, she tried to hold back the scream, tried to keep from sobbing. This wasn't real. Taking a deep breath, Nia grabbed her phone. She'd call them. They'd be wrong. Yes. Wrong. As she waited to connect, she sat at her computer and pulled up a map of Kentucky. Just where in the hell was Ash, anyway? Nielsen glanced at his computer, checked the email. Checked his cell phone. Although he hadn't expected an immediate response, part of him still wanted one. He needed to speak with Nia Hollister. Get this over with. The silence in his office was interrupted by a brisk knock, and he looked up, saw his administrative assistant standing there, her bright green eyes locked on his face. Something in those eyes warned him. He tensed. Yes? There's a Ms. Hollister on the phone, she said. The stern mask she wore cracked, and for a moment, he saw the pity there as she shifted her gaze past him to stare at his murder board. It's the victim's next of kin. Shit. He'd seen them enter the trees. The two men. Law and King. Law. Fucking Law Riley, bastard. Fury all but turned his vision red, choked him. After all this time, why were things going wrong now? What were they doing in his woods? Too close. Even if they were moving off in the wrong direction. Too close. None of this had gone as planned. Setting his jaw, he backed away. None of it. But then again, it had been a while since things had gone as planned. Stupid fucking bunch of flowers, Brody thought, kicking at the dead and dying blooms.